Absolutely. Not a problem. Good morning, everybody. My name is Roger Zelaya, and today I am the head of brokerage for Radius Agent. Today, we're going to be talking about the residential purchase agreement from a listing agent's perspective. I call it the perfect RPA when representing sellers. We'll talk about a lot of different things. Typically, like I've explained before, this is probably an 8-hour class. We're going to try to squeeze it in 1 hour. But we'll talk about as is, included, excluded, repair request, timelines, contingencies, and a heck of a lot more. So let's get started. I want to make it interactive, guys. So if you guys have any questions, just interrupt me. You don't necessarily have to raise your hand because I may not be looking at the other screen, but so just blurt it out, right? Last week, we touched on a residential purchase agreement from a buyer's agent perspective, right? And so, and there's certain things that we're not going to talk about, which are self-explanatory, which is, the agency disclosure, right? And of course, the offer, which would be the day of the offer that's being made. But usually the buyer's agent is going to be the one that's going to be filling this out, right? As a listing agent, you got to make sure that the seller's brokerage firm is the correct information. The agent is correct. And so is the license number for you, right? For the company and for you. In this case, it's dual agent, right? So because it's an example, right? But the buyer's brokerage firm, make sure that they fill that up. You'll be surprised how many times this buyer's agent broker information is left blank, which then gives you and your TC additional paperwork. So now you're going to have to go get an agency agreement, right? Agency confirmation, I'm sorry. Okay, this is the purchase price for 30 days, $10,000 EMD, $900,000 loan for $1 million property. Be very, very, very careful, especially if you're a listing agent, right? Do they want $6,000? Do they want maybe $4,000, right? And if you don't work that into your numbers with the seller's net, this may end up coming out of your commission because the seller may say, like, I didn't know that we were going to pay that. And so be very, very careful when it comes to that, right? Also, be careful with this one as well. And we're talking about 3G2 because other credits, right? They might say, like, look, I need you to give me $3,000 for Section 1 clearance from Top Termite or XYZ Termite or whoever the company is, right? And then, of course, be very, very careful with this one as well. Even if it is, I've had phone calls, guys, where G3, it is not filled out, right? I want to, I tell people as a listing agent, I am in the business of closing deals, right? So if the buyer's agent forgot to put in their request for payment, request for buyer's agent commission, I'll pick up the phone and say, did you intend for that to be blank, right? Because sometimes, we all make errors and mistakes, right? Maybe they were in a hurry. Maybe they forgot. Maybe this is their first transaction. I don't know, right? But, the seller compensation goes here. A lot of people today are asking for 3% and they're being countered to depending on the market. I know that where I work, will probably get countered at 2%. And I'm willing to take that. I won't go to the buyer, but again, it depends on how you run your business, right? Okay, so we're going to talk about contingencies, the loan contingency, right? We talked last week as from a buyer's perspective, I want the longest period of time available to me and my buyer, which would be 17 days. Because if I put a loan contingency of 21 days, which used to be an RPA a while back, more than likely I may not get my offer accepted, right? So look at all of the contingencies. From a buyer's agent, right? You want the longest term. From a seller's agent perspective or listing agent, you want to shorten these terms and squeeze them as much as possible. So when I am a listing agent and they leave everything blank, right? I don't want to wait necessarily 17 days for a loan approval or loan contingency. So maybe I'll counter it to 14 or 15. But before I counter, right, there's two things that are going to be crucial here. And let's say that I counter to 12 on both of these, right? But the loan officer tells me, no way I can do it in 12 days. Well, the next question is, do you think you can do it in 13, 14 days, right? Or 8 days? So some loan officers are willing to do it or will rush the file. Some of them, they just already know that they're not going to be able to get it done, right? So before that happens, I call the loan officer and say, Mr. Loan Officer, my name is so-and-so, calling about our mutual client, blah, or, the client so-and-so. Do you think you can get the loan done in 14 days or 12 days, right? And that's going to depend on my counteroffer, right? Even if it says, like, I've had loan officers that say, no, Roger, I cannot get it done. I mean, 17 days is already kind of squeezing it, right? And it's like, okay, well, then I need something better than 17 days, right? Because I want to make sure that the appraisal gets ordered. So shorten your timelines from a listing agent perspective. But before you do that, pick up the phone, call the loan officer, and ask about the appraisal and the loan, because it's going to depend on that. I've had some aggressive loan officers say, look, yeah, we can get it done in 10 days, right? I'll make sure that the appraisal gets ordered immediately, etc. Investigation of property. I don't want my seller waiting 17 days for them to find out, yeah, we want the property, or no, we don't want the property, right? So typically, I'm going to shorten that to about 10 days from a listing agent's perspective, right? And again, I call the agent and negotiate this verbally over the phone. I say, like, look, man, like 17 days is not going to work out because my seller is in a hurry. They want to know in about 10 days, maybe 12 days, do your buyers want the property, yes or no, right? So I'm going to counter this, to 10 days. But sometimes the buyer's agent, they're hesitant, right? Well, I don't know if we can get it done in 17 days or in 10 days. So I start negotiating. Well, can you get it done in 12 days? So the shorter the timeline for my seller, the better it is going to be for the seller, right? So always negotiate better timelines for your seller. Same with insurance, right? I don't want to give them 10 days to investigate the property and then give them 17 days for insurance. Right. If you think about that, right? Like, so yeah, we got the contingency not waived, but removed for investigation of property at day 10, but at day 17, they find out that insurance is going to be not the typical $100 a month like it used to be. I don't even know what it is today, but in fact, it's going to be $600 a month. So now your insurance contingency comes into play, and now you are at 16 or 17 days, or worse yet, they haven't given you the contingency and you're at 17 or 19 days, right? And then your seller is thinking, okay, well, they like the condition of the property, but your insurance is still in effect, your insurance contingency, right? Same with the prelim. And so typically what I will do is this will be like 14 days, or 12 days, right? Informational access to the property. I don't mind them having access to the property, right? I'll explain that to the seller and say, like, look, they have investigation period of 10 days, but they could come back within 17 days, or you can make this 10-day and make it match, right? Let's talk about, so I will typically make the insurance, the review of seller documents, the prelim, all of these documents, right? All of these contingencies, I'll make them match the investigation of property, maybe 1 or 2 days, leniency, or like if I put a 10-day here, then I may want this one to be 10 days. The review of seller documents, I don't want them to wait 17 days because I already know that I have my disclosures ready to go. So I may want this as 10 days. I may want this as 10 days because I usually, the moment I have a signed listing agreement, I order a prelim. And so I change all of the timelines to benefit the seller, and I negotiate over the phone with them, right? Time of possession from a listing agent's perspective is, can they move? Do they have a lot of stuff in their house? Or can they really move if we record on Wednesday at 10 in the morning? Will they really be out Tuesday night, right? Or do we need to do a seller in possession, right? This is the time of possession. So you may want to do it, you may want to give possession at a later time. Maybe you want it to be, at 6 p.m. Sorry, not 6 p.m. Maybe you want it at a different time, right? Or do you need a seller in possession, 1 or 2 days? Typically, I will always, regardless whether they need it or not, I will ask the seller. I will negotiate a seller in possession, right, for 3 days. I want to give my seller some time to move out. Nothing crazy, right? Not like 28 days, 23 days, just 3 days. And I'm also going to pick up the phone and say, Mr. Buyer's agent, do you think your buyer can give us 3 days for us to move out? Because, they work, they have this, they have sports, they have children, etc. Right? So give them a little bit of time. And now if you don't need it, you can always, they could just be moved out and then your buyers can move back in, or you can cancel the SIP, right? The seller in possession. Very, very important, guys. The seller delivery of documents, right? When I get a listing, I immediately, the moment that it is signed, the listing agreement, I immediately order the prelim. I tell the seller that if it's an NHOA, they're probably going to have to order the documents and how much it's going to cost. And I have them call the HOA to find out how much that's going to cost. But remember that you don't want to delay, from a listing agent's perspective, the seller delivery of documents, the SPQ, the TDS, all in the AVID, guys. The listing agent's AVID now, today, according to the TDS, is part of a disclosure from the seller, even though it's coming from you. And one of the biggest problems that we have in our office, and this is just not our office, it's just generally speaking, including myself, guys, and I am a broker, okay, is that the listing agent's AVID last minute, right? And so once I learned that the listing agent's AVID is considered a seller disclosure, then I do my AVID as soon as possible, right? But what you don't want is you are in a 30-day escrow, you're at day 25, and then you give them the seller's AVID or the listing agent's AVID with it, at day 25. And how many days do they have to review that then? 5 days. So now you're asking for them to remove contingencies, and they're like, well, we can't because we have this new information and we have 5 days to review it. Okay.
And Roger,
go ahead, Leah.
Hi, Roger. Hi, everybody. Yeah, and what I think agents don't realize is when they do that, they're putting their own client in jeopardy, and we can become liable for that. Ultimately, right? Blow the deal.
100%. Because the seller, hired you to represent me. Like, I don't know any better. You're the professional. You're the one with the license, right? And so please, please, please do not turn in the AVID late. And if you have a knowledgeable buyer's agent and they may not be ready to close, right? Now you've just given them 5 days, which means that if you're going to give them a notice to buyer to perform or a demand to close, you cannot, if it's going to be a demand to close, they've just purchased, basically, you've given them 2 extra days, because you cannot give them a demand to close until 3 days prior. Or if they have not removed all contingencies, then you have to give them a notice to buyer to perform. And that is 2 days prior. So they basically got 3 additional days. So yes, Leah, I agree with you. Thank you for that. Don't delay it. Okay.
And
quick question, Roger.
I have one more question. Oh,
sorry. Leah and then Boji.
Okay.
Go ahead, Leah.
Okay, sorry about that. One more question. When you were discussing possession, I know it depends what side of the fence you're on. I guess I'm sort of used to the time in which if you're requesting additional, if a buyer rather is requesting additional time, I'm concerned about the feasibility of them being out within those few days. And if you're going to set it up that way, do you then have to do it as a rent back? I mean, that's opening up a whole nother can of worms and leaving extra funds in escrow to give the other side security and all of that. Or just in general, I guess I'm just used to, having my folks out on day one, but I've been on that other side of the fence as well. So Is that 3 days really protecting,
No.
your person?
Yeah. Well, so
If there are no stipulations.
yeah, very good question. I've been in the industry since 1991, but I've been selling real estate since 2014. Okay. And the way that I explain it to the buyer, right, if I'm representing the buyer, is look, they need 3 days for them to move out. And I will know typically, like I've never had a seller overstay their stay, if that makes any sense, right? I will also tell the buyer, look, the seller wants to sell the house, the buyer wants to buy the house, and like typically everybody is acting in good faith, and it is also in the purchase agreement that we all have to act in good faith, right? I have seen though people that like I asked for a 3-day seller in possession, and they say, yeah, sure, not a problem. We could do the 3-day seller in possession at $400 a day and $20,000, being held in escrow. I'm like, dude, you're out of your mind. Like, that doesn't make any sense, because like you're telling me that your buyer, which is typically the buyer's agent, don't trust that the fact that the seller is going to be out in time. And then if that's the case, then I'll, if I cannot get sense into the buyer's agent, then I'll tell the seller, like, look, we can't get it on, because they're going to want to withhold all this money. So can we make sure that we are going to be out by that time? And then 9 out of 10, I would probably say that I do get that 3-day seller in possession for free, no cost, right? But sometimes, I'll talk to them and they're like adamant, $400 a day times 3 days and $20,000 holding an escrow. I'm like, bro, like my seller is making $69,000 and you want to withhold 20 of it? That doesn't make any sense, right? So again, it's negotiations.
Right. Now, would that make a difference? In certain VA loans have certain requirements in terms of when the buyer is actually in the property.
Think about this, right? If the property records on Tuesday at 10 a.m., where's the seller at? At work, right? So that means that they have to move out the day before. So from a listing agent perspective, which is what this class is about, I always give the seller, or I always request from the buyer's agent, a 3-day seller in possession at no cost. And I would say 99% of the time I get it, right? Meaning that my seller or the buyer's agent agrees to it. Now, make sure that when we tend to make decisions on behalf of the buyer or the seller without educating the buyer or the seller. And sometimes I get phone calls and saying blah, 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 blah. And my question is, well, have you asked your buyer? Have you asked your seller? Right? And so they need to make that decision. Boji, you had a question.
Yeah, my question is real quick. Like with all these documents, the TDS and all that, what if the buyers are not signing or initialing these documents at the same time? They say they're going to remove all their contingency. Are they really removing the contingency, or do they have to sign all these documents? I'm the listing agent.
Okay. If you are the listing agent and they don't read them and they don't sign them and they remove the contingency, and they give you a contingency removal form, you don't represent them, right? It is the buyer's responsibility, the buyer's agent responsibility to, review these documents. And let's say that on your TDS, right, they don't choose, they choose not to do a home inspection, and the TDS says that the roof is at the end of its life because it's 48 years old, and they remove the contingency, they remove the contingency.
Okay, but if they're delaying signing these TDS, you can just send them a notice to perform.
That is correct, and we're going to talk about those timelines in a minute. Athene, you had a question.
Good morning, Roger. I think, in different parts of LA, the seller to remain in possession, I think it's common in the area that you mostly practice real estate, because I've never seen that over here. And if the seller is to stay in possession, usually will have like a, it will be more than just 3 days. Because I think about, I guess, from a litigious point of view, what if okay, now the new buyer is the owner and the seller's moving out, and let's say one of the movers falls down the stairs and says, oh, I'm going to sue you because there was something wrong here. I don't know. Like, people are so litigious. People are always looking for excuses to sue. God forbid there's some sort of injury that happens when the seller is still in possession, but they're actually not the owner. Like, then
Yeah, good question.
it
Let me
becomes
address
very
that for you.
messy.
But let me address that for you. According to the seller in possession form, that's why it's important to have the form, right? We can just say on the counteroffer, COE plus 3, right? But that leaves a whole bunch of stuff open for interpretation, right? And then, but the seller in possession basically says that whoever is in possession must have insurance, must have this, must have that, must have utilities, and all kinds of other stuff, right? And so if the mover, falls on day 2, and the buyer's no longer the buyer's now the owner, the seller is supposed to have insurance on it. And that's why it's important to use the proper form, because it covers a lot of information, right? I always say, do not make addendums. There's probably a form for that. Okay. And you're right, Dean. It could be, it could be that in the area that I practice, seller in possession plus 3 is not a big deal, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm not dealing with a $2.5-3.5 million property. I'm dealing with the seller and the buyer at a 680 or 720 or whatever, right? Or maybe when I'm lucky, I get a 1.2.
Right. Yeah.
So,
I think
but
it's
in
just
LA,
different.
completely different.
Yeah, LA's like, no, recording, you're out, and I just, in a way that feels easier, because there's just, the seller just knows this is when we're closing. And as long as that timeline doesn't change, they know that absolutely they need to be out. And by the time, usually even 5 days before or 3 days before, when we're doing the final walkthrough, usually the seller's out. The place is vacant by then. We're like good to go. And that just, that feels good. I did have one occurrence happen where there was a homeless person who had basically broken into the home after the seller had moved out. So in that window between final walkthrough and the buyer actually walking in the front door, it had been occupied and there was like drug paraphernalia. Anyways, but that's LA, so.
Yeah. And that does
Thank you.
happen. Yeah,
Yes,
of course.
yes.
Thank you, Athena. Christopher Cruz, what's up?
Hey, good morning, Roger. For the seller disclosures, so if I'm the listing agent and I have an example, I have a listing, it's pending. I've been asking the seller for like this pest control invoice or work order. And if that to me is part of seller disclosures, and if I give that after the buyer removes all contingencies, does that reignite their inspection contingency? Or can they say, hey, you know what? Based on this pest control work order, I no longer want to purchase the home.
Yes. Yeah. The short answer, it does not open the contingency period because they've already removed it. And that's on paragraph 14, right? And we may not have time to go into that, but they can only cancel because of that new disclosure. To your example, right? They removed all contingencies. And now here's the termite report, and it has $15,000 worth of work. And then the buyer sends you a repair request and the seller says no, then boom, he can cancel because of that. But the contingency does not reopen.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, guys. This one for listing agents is going to be super important, right? Do they want the stove and the fridge, the washer and dryer? Luckily, I made myself a checklist. I think actually Joe had a question. Huh, Joe? Did you have a question, Joe? Okay. If you don't have a question, if you have a question, just, speak up.
Hello?
But yeah, Joe, you had a question? Joe Stevenson?
From a buyer's agent point of view, like, how most houses are staged. And then we have to do a final walkthrough. And I saw one time when they cleared it, I saw floor damage that was being hidden by staging. And I was like, I'll be damned. Luckily, for that instance, he was going to renovate anyway. Most of the guys I deal with for handy, so they was a Joe, I'll sand it down. I'm not even worried about it. But then I thought about, what if I get someone who's not handy? They're going to see this floor damage and be like, what is this? How do you deal with that? Because
good question, right? That floor damage was likely there when you guys made the offer and the property is being sold as is, right? Did the seller know about it and didn't disclose it? And was it a like damage like this, or was it damage like that? You know what I mean? So, but to answer your question, the property is being sold as is anyway. Yeah. Okay, guys, I've had, from a buyer's agent perspective, I've had listing agents buy me, not by me, but by my buyer, a refrigerator. And once upon a time, that has happened twice. And once upon a time, a washer and dryer. Okay, so make sure that you are having a conversation with your seller. Are you willing to, include the washer, dryer, etc., right? This is a new one, right? Electric charging systems. Those Tesla chargers, I think they're about $650, and you could just, take it off. And do you want it, right? We'll talk. Let me go in here real quick. Like this particular offer that came in, right? The smoke detectors, smoke alarms and CO2 detectors are being done by the seller. And typically that is a seller thing, right? They should hopefully have it. When you go into your listing appointment, you should make sure that you let them know, you should visually check. Do they have smoke alarms? Do they work? Do they have CO2 detectors? And is the water heater braced, right? Because if they are not, and this is checked, then it's still the seller's responsibility anyways, right? Escrow fees typically is going to be pay their own. The owner's title policy, typically it's going to be the seller paying for it. The county transfer tax, typically is going to be the seller paying for it. Now, I have had offers, especially in 2021, right, where the buyer is going to pay all escrow fees, and the buyer is going to pay the title, and the buyer is going to pay the county transfer tax, just to make their offer stronger, right? So, but typically these are seller fees, right? HOA transfer fees are typically the seller. I always include from a seller's perspective, a home warranty, whether it's First American, Home Warranty of America, whoever. And I explain to the sellers, we want to do this because if something goes wrong in the next 12 months, then hopefully they don't have to bug us, right? Let's talk about, let's see. Okay, so condition of property, right? This is as is, right? And you have to explain to the seller like what as is means. And of course, you got to explain to the buyer, right? The best way that I can explain it is what you see is what you get. So that's what as is means. With everything that the seller has disclosed to you, you can either take it as is or ask for them to repair it. And we're going to touch on repairs in a minute, right? So condition of property, unless otherwise agreed, the property shall be delivered as is in its present physical condition as of the date of the acceptance. The property, including pool, spa, landscaping, and grounds, is to maintain substantially the same as of the date of acceptance, except as paragraph 9C. So if you guys agreed on something else, right? This one is kind of important. Seller is not responsible to repair any holes left after the removal of any wall hangings, such as pictures and mirrors, right? I've had buyers agents say like, hey, you guys didn't repaint the wall. Well, according to the contract, we don't have to. They can if there's a hole, they can just patch it. They don't have to paint it, right? As a matter of fact, they don't even have to do that. Let's see. Okay, so if items are not removed when possession is delivered to the buyer, all items shall be deemed abandoned. Buyer, after first delivering the seller a written notice to remove the items within 3 days, may pay to have such items removed or disposed of, and may bring legal action as per this agreement to receive reasonable costs from the seller. This one is not so common, but it is sometimes comes up, right? And they left. They didn't ask anybody, but they thought, oh, why wouldn't the buyer want a couch from 1975, right? We love it, so the buyers will probably love it, and that is not true. Everything needs to be removed, right? Okay, we talked about seller in possession for a minute. I want to get to contingencies and removal of contingencies, right? So this agreement is, unless otherwise specified in agreement, in the paragraph 3L or an attached contingency removal from buyer form, is contingent upon the buyer obtaining the loan specified. If contingent, the buyer shall act diligently and in good faith to obtain designated loan. If there is no appraisal or insurance contingency of the appraisal or insurance contingency has been waived or removed, then the failure of the property to appraise at the purchase price or a lender conditioning of the loan on obtaining insurance does not entitle the buyer to exercise the cancellation right pursuant to the loan contingency. So in other words, this one is a new paragraph. And basically what it says, and people were using this, we got loan approval, we're ready to go, and now we find out that insurance is not going to be $150 like we thought, but in fact it is $500 a month. And so they use the loan contingency to cancel because of the insurance. So you cannot do that. We're going to skip appraisals for a minute, but appraisals is basically, look, it needs to appraise at a certain number. If not, you guys got to renegotiate again. I want to get to, let's see, paragraph 9, items included and excluded. We touched on that from a buyer's agent perspective, right? But please make sure that you talk to your seller as to what is included, excluded. This is a true story I'm going to tell you right now. And it was not my deal, but it was in Rancho Cucamonga. It was this is like 2014, $2.5 million home. And when you walk into the home, there's a beautiful chandelier that was approximately $250,000, $250,000. The listing agent did not exclude it. And therefore, when the buyer moved in, that chandelier was gone. And instead of having a big, gigantic chandelier, they had a small little chandelier. And it became a big problem because if it's affixed to the property, it's usually included, right? We're at 1040. I wanted to let you guys know I use a light switch as an example, right? I go to Home Depot and I buy a light switch and I put it in my pocket after I pay for it. That is considered personal property. The moment I put that light switch on the wall to operate the light, it's now real property. Okay. If you another one to watch out for is dedicated devices, right? So, for example, if you have, last week we talked about the iPad that was when you guys went and showed the property to your buyer was on the kitchen table. And then when you guys did the home inspection, it was on the couch. And that particular iPad, is dedicated for the pool pump, the lights, the waterfall, or anything else. That particular iPad is included in the sale of the home. Okay, so be very careful about that. And then
But can I say something? Could they
Yeah.
switch out the iPad to something that would be less expensive? If they had the iPad that was just their own iPad, could they switch it out to another device that basically would do the same thing, but not the same iPad that they have, because that was their personal iPad they used? They could use another device that wasn't exactly the same iPad as what they were using to still maintain the garage openers, whatever.
The,
Do that.
the short answer is yes, right? But remember, from a seller's perspective, disclose, 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 right? So what you're basically saying is they have a 2026 iPad, and then when they move out, they're going to change all of the information to a 2010 iPad, right? That doesn't perform as good, right?
Right.
You got to disclose it, right? Because likely that iPad was picked up and managed when the home inspector was there, right? So my attorney says I have never represented anybody in court that over disclosed, right? So certainly don't, just disclose, disclose, disclose. I think you have a question. Go ahead. I think you had a question or no? Not anymore?
I'm
No,
sorry,
I'm
I need
good.
to put my hand down. Sorry.
Oh, okay, no worries. Okay, leased or liened items, right? We're talking about solar systems that are leased, right? We're talking about the soft water system that is perhaps leased. You got to disclose that, right? Items excluded from the sale, right? We'll talk about this for a minute. Flat screen TV, speakers, and other items. Well, let's read it. Unless otherwise agreed, the following items are excluded from the sale. All items specified in paragraph 3P, audio and video components such as flat screen TV, speakers, and other items if any such item is not itself attached to the property. So the speakers that are on the ceiling, those are attached to the property. They're going to be included. But the speaker that is on this is not a speaker stand and you can't really see it, but let's say that this is a speaker stand, then that would be excluded from the sale. Okay. I want to talk about, this one is important, guys, for listing agents. Reinspection fees. If any repair in paragraph 10B is not completed within the time specified and the lender requires an additional inspection to be made, seller shall be responsible for a corresponding reinspection fee. If the buyer incurs costs to comply with the lender requirements concerning those items, seller shall be responsible for those fees. What does that mean? This is super common, especially in the area that I'm at, right? Smoke detectors are there, but they don't work. So the appraiser goes to the property, test it, say, got to replace, I don't know, call it four smoke detectors and one CO2 detector. Then the appraisal comes in the value is subject to you, Mr. Seller, fixing these items. And now the appraiser needs to go out to the property. And does anybody know how much they charge today? $150 usually, right? So they charge $150 and the buyer is like, no, you should have, you need to pay me the $150 because it's on here. Okay. Statutory.
Hey, Roger, real quick,
Jimmy.
that example that you just said, good morning, by the way. You said
Good morning.
that it was for the lender, but you kind of used that example for the appraisal.
Yeah, good question, because the lender orders the appraisal.
Right.
Right. So, and then the lender will look at the appraisal and on it, it'll say, yes, it is worth $1 million subject to these repairs, and it's going to be smoke detector and CO2, and maybe there's 3 or 4 smoke detectors. That's why.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, no problem.
That's why we have to do our job as a listing agent to make sure those things are done before we list the house. I'm dealing with that today, literally, as I'm trying to go live on my listing tomorrow.
Guys, Leah, you're 100% right. I do a lot of probates, right? So, and when the property is emptied, do you guys think that all of the smoke detectors and CO2s are there, and do they work? The answer is no.
They never work.
No.
They never work. So I legit in my garage have a box of smoke detectors and CO2 detectors. And the moment I get the listing agreement, right, and I'm going to bring my lockbox, I bring a ladder, small ladder, and hopefully it's not a 2-story, but I will personally install the smoke detectors. This is just part of the service that I provide, because most of my probates, the administrator is out of state, so they're not going to fly into Rancho Cucamonga to do that, right?
And then Roger, we also typically do a retrofit as well, which inspects those and makes sure everything's working. So it
Yeah.
should be taken care of anyways.
It should be taken care of, but and you guys, you're in LA, so yeah, 100% of the time you got to do a 9A report, right?
Yeah.
Which covers that. But where I work at, we don't have 9A report.
Oh, got you. Okay.
And so yeah, which is cool. I mean, I don't like it. I don't like the 9A report, to be honest, but it's part of work, right? It's part of the process. Okay, let's continue here. And again, right, like we're touching just on the most important things. Let's talk about buyer investigations. Some listing agents have denied us, the buyer's agent, right, access to the property because perhaps the home inspection was done at day 3, and then the appraisal may have been done at day 9, right? And then all of a sudden the buyer wants to have, based on the home inspection, they're like, look, I'd like to go back to the property and I want to do a roof inspection, right? And then the listing agent says, no, can't do it. You guys already did your property investigations. No, that's not true. Or the buyer may want to send a termite person to go see if the property is infected with termites, right? And some listing agents don't allow that. And I refer them to this paragraph over here, which is my 17-day informational access to the property, right? And so in addition to that paragraph, I think we were on paragraph 10. Paragraph 12. It also talks about that, if it is at the buyer's expense, right, then they can do investigations, test surveys, and other studies. They're called buyer investigations. And then here it talks about what buyer investigations mean. So as a listing agent, just look, be nice, be courteous, and work together with the buyer's agent to get the deal closed, right? One of the things that I get a lot is somebody that sold a house in 1985. They've been at this house for the last 40 years. At the moment the buyer cancels based on their investigation periods, they're like, nope, I'm not signing the cancellation unless I keep that $10,000, $15,000, $30,000 deposit. And please, as a listing agent, educate your seller and let them know how that works. Because if they sold the house back in the 80s, it's true. Like the moment the buyer didn't perform, boom, keep the deposit. But the purchase agreement back then was 1-pager. Now it's I think it's 17 or 18. Yeah, 17 pages nowadays, right? So you got contingency, you got a lot of moving parts. Okay, let's talk about seller right to cancel. Guys, the sellers, we got 10 minutes. It's really tough for the seller to cancel if the buyer is performing. Okay, let me repeat that. It's really tough for the seller to cancel if the buyer is performing, right? So let's talk about seller right to cancel, right? And it's got to be in writing. Seller right to cancel because of buyer contingencies. If by the time specified in this agreement, 10 days, 17 days, whatever, right? Buyer does not deliver to seller a removal of the applicable contingency or cancellation of this agreement, then seller, after first delivering a notice to buyer to perform, may cancel this agreement. In such event, seller shall authorize the return of buyer's deposit except for fees incurred by buyer. So essentially what this says is if they are not performing, you give them a notice to perform and then you can cancel. However, what if they are performing and they removed any and all contingencies and you're supposed to close by Monday? What are your choices then? And the seller's like, I have to cancel, whatever the reason is, right? Now, the seller may end up in breach of contract. That's a totally different class. But in this example, if they're supposed to close by Monday, is that what I said? Today is Wednesday. The seller has to unfortunately wait, and then they would have to serve say the closing date is on Monday. They would have to serve a demand to close 3 days prior, and then if they do not perform, then they can cancel. It's really tough for the seller to cancel. A friend of mine just told me about a deal that the buyer wanted the property really bad. The seller canceled for no reason. 5 years in court. They just got authorization to force the sale. The buyer forced the sale. Okay. And so that deal is not our deal, but it was interesting. Seller right to cancel because of buyer contract obligations, right? After first delivering notice to buyer to perform, may cancel this agreement is by the time specified if the buyer does not take the following action, right? And there's a whole bunch of actions that they can do, including the deposit, right? Seller right to cancel based on seller contingencies. Seller may cancel this agreement by good faith exercise of any seller contingency included in this agreement or otherwise agreed, so long as the contingency has not already been removed or waived in writing. Like an example would be the seller must buy another property to sell this one, right? That would be an example of that. We're gonna skip buyer right to cancel because we talked about that last time, right? Okay, let's talk about demand to close because we have 7 minutes. Remember, if the buyer is performing and they have removed any and all contingencies, there's really nothing for the seller to give a notice to the buyer to perform, right? So that's why I said if it's closing Monday, right, and they have removed all contingencies and they're not late, but the seller wants to cancel no matter what, step 1 is explain to them how they can cancel. And step 2 is they have to go find legal counsel for an attorney to advise them as to what to do. Because if they end up being in breach of contract, then that's a totally different issue, right? But the demand to close. Before buyer or seller may cancel this agreement for failure of the other party to close escrow pursuant to this agreement, buyer or seller must first deliver to the other party a demand to close, CAR form DCE. The demand to close shall, 1, be in writing by the applicable buyer or seller, 2, give the other party at least 3 days. So if we're talking that you're supposed to close on Monday, right? Let me see if I can pull up a calendar. I cannot. So if we're supposed to close Monday, then we count 0, 1, 2, 3. So the earliest that you can give a demand to close would be the 24th, because the 24th is day 0, day 1 is Saturday, day 2 is Sunday, day 3 is Monday the 27th, right? And then when can you cancel? At 12:01 a.m. on Tuesday morning, because it goes to 11:59. Now, you and I know that if they're not going to perform, they're not going to fund and record on the 27th at 6 p.m., right? They're not. And my computer just crashed. What the heck? Yeah. Okay. That's no bueno. Let me see if I can log in real quick.
Unless that Monday was a holiday, right?
Unless that Monday is a holiday, then it goes to the next day. Correct. But in our example, for 3 days, right?
Would it be a good idea to bring the example RPA to your next listing agreement after you sign the listing, or before you sign the listing, you kind of go over that to your first-time seller client?
Well, the answer is yes, 100%. Like I personally, I don't bring the entire listing agreement. I'm sorry, purchase agreement, but the highlights, right? Like I want you to understand that paragraph 14 is the most important paragraph in this whole entire enchilada here, right? Because the paragraph 14, like most of the phone calls that I receive, the answer is in paragraph 14, right? Because like, look, you're talking about time periods, right? Cancellation rights, buyer review of documents. What I explained to the sellers is paragraph 14.2. Okay, if buyer may, within the time specified in 3L, 17 days, 5 days, whatever, request that the seller may make repairs or take any other action regarding the property via car form RR. But here's the key. Seller has no obligation to agree to or respond to buyer's request or that were made. If the seller does not agree or does not respond, buyer is not contractually entitled to have the repairs or other requests made and may only cancel based on the contingencies of this agreement. Let me just basically, paragraph 14B2 says the seller is under no obligation to respond, right? So I get a lot of phone calls like, look, I'm not removing contingencies as a buyer's agent. We did a repair request. The listing agent is not answering us, and now they gave me a notice to the buyer to perform. Is that legit? The answer is yes, because the seller has no obligation to do it. Then you don't perform, you cancel the agreement, you move on, right? Okay, so we're at 10:58. And the last thing I want to show you guys is the definitions, right? The definition is and instructions, right? What does acceptance mean? Agent, authorized agent, counting days. I encourage you guys to read this, right? Anytime you give the notice, that's day 0, okay? Deliver or delivery or delivered, electronic copy. And then the last one I'm going to touch on is liquidated damages, right? From a buyer's agent perspective, I want the liquidated damages to be signed, but as a listing, I just think like, look, let's just agree on liquidated damages from a buyer's agent and listing agent. But some sellers are super savvy and they're like, nope, we're not signing that, because if they don't perform, we want to sue them for as much as we can. That is usually in Athene's world in LA, right? $4.5, $3.5 million properties. My sellers are not sophisticated over here at $850,000. This is probably, they got lucky 6 years ago. They bought it for $450. Now they're selling it for $850. They're not sophisticated, right? So they look for guidance from me. But personally, I like the liquidated damages, because then, you know, are we as listing agents, are we really in the business of like keeping people's deposits? I always say no, because I don't want to tie up the property for my seller unless the buyer really just didn't perform, right? Let's talk about mediation real quick. If you click on this, if you go to consumermediation.org, your seller or buyer can request mediation, and then we got arbitration, right? And personally, arbitration is cheaper than litigation. So if we go to mediation and we don't agree, then we would go to arbitration. And wherever the arbitrator says, then we roll with that, versus suing each other. I have a seller suing us, and we are upwards of $185,000 in legal fees, right? And she did not want to mediate, right? She did not want to mediate. So according to our listing agreement, we are entitled to attorney fees, because we're going to end up winning anyways, right? The other thing is entity sellers. Make sure you click on that, right? If you have an entity, do not say that your seller's name is ABC Company Inc. And then you have the signature ABC Company Inc. No, that's not the way it works, right? The way it works is entity seller, full entity name. It's going to be ABC Company Inc., right? And then who's authorized to sign? Michael Jones, right? So over here, the entity, the name of the seller is ABC Company, right? And ABC Company Inc., Michael Jones. So what needs to go here in the signature? Michael Jones, not ABC Company. I see so many sellers that sign as a company name. A company is not a person. A company is an entity, and therefore an entity cannot sign for itself. Somebody manages that entity, in this case, Michael Jones, and he would be the one that would be signing. Same if you have, you know,
Like a power of attorney or?
EOJIE, he trust, dated, I don't know, 3/3/23, right? Who is the trustee on that? Well, actually, we're going to say Roger.
Good for you.
Right? Because I manage your trust, right? And then here would go, Boji, he, trust, and you could put TR, dated, I don't know, 3/3/23, whatever it is, right? And then the authorized signer is going to be Roger, or we're just going to put on here Marcella.
Thanks, Ron.
Marcella Jones, right? So just make sure. So, and here it would go Marcella Jones. That's what the name would be. It's not going to be Boji, he, trust, dated. No, that's not it. Okay, we are out of time, and we actually went over 3 minutes. I'm going to stop the recording, and if you guys have any questions, then I can answer them for you. Do you?
Good. Can I have one. Can we
Yep.
go back to the top where the commission is and everything else? That one thing I had questions on when you said the seller has something when it's a termite or whatever. I didn't quite understand who pays those fees and what the question was. Yeah, remember at the top you were go to where the commission is and everything else, and then we would say.
Yeah, good question.
Yeah,
So
right.
let me.
4,000, 8,000. I did not understand how you, as a listing agent, how do you come up with that numbers?
You don't. This is the offer that you are receiving.
Okay, but this is a list. This is a listing. This is my listing.
Correct.
I'm listing it. So how would I come up with that? With the offer,
Okay.
I don't have an
Let's
offer.
say-
I'm listing it.
Okay, Marcella, I know that. This is a purchase agreement. So now that you listed it, you put it on the MLS, Roger, the buyer's agent, is sending you an offer, right?
Okay.
And I know that my buyer needs help for closing costs. And
Right.
that's why I put on here $4,000.
Okay. So this is not on my listing agreement. This is the buyer. You're switching it out.
Yeah, this is a purchase
Okay,
agreement.
I just want to make sure. Okay, I just want to make sure because I thought we were talking about from a listing department. When I'm doing a listing agreement, I don't see that on my listing agreement. So I go, what I'm doing the listing. So I'm a little confused on that part. I'm sorry.
You just have to be aware that this is here, because if you don't counter it out, your seller is now obligated to pay that $4,000. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
can I just
and
just run a scenario by you? On a Green Hill that I just sold, we had basically she did her inspections and everything else, and then we didn't have anything written up like this. And then we was just a regular listing. She got the offer, and then we had the inspection. And guess what? The roof had to be. I got $30,000 worth of repairs. We negotiate 15,000, but at the same token, we negotiated back and forth. But I mean, was there anywhere I could have protected my seller in case that came up that she wouldn't have had to? But we had to negotiate it. It was part of the negotiation, but we agreed on 15,000 versus 30. But is there
the answer is yes. Paragraph 14B2, right? Seller has no obligation to agree or to respond to buyer's request on Form RR.
Okay.
So
But then
the seller said, like, go kick rocks. And then the buyer then is not contractually entitled to have the repairs or other requests made, and may only cancel based on the contingencies of this agreement. So like what I say is like if the seller didn't want to pay the 30,000 or the 15,000, they could have just said no.
Right, and it would have been the deal would have, she would have walked and the deal would have closed and it would go back again. So yeah, basically, so those are the deals that you gotta, she wasn't gonna pay 30,000. I wasn't gonna let her pay 30, but we negotiate the 15, and that was it worked out okay. We got a full offer, and it was like, the one I sold in 8 days, and it was just, she really wanted, and I guess I could have negotiated harder, but still, I didn't want to lose the buyer because the lady went into Oklahoma. So anyway, it worked out good. So.
And you are correct, right? 2021-ish, right? I always, as a listing agent, I never asked my seller to pay for any repairs because remember, we had 17 offers. We had 23 offers.
Yeah.
So then the seller is in full control. Now in 2016, when I would have one offer, I'd be like, look, Mr. Seller, this is how it works. But if we don't respond to this to this buyer, they may walk. Right. And remember, we were in the market for 68 days, and it may take us another 68 days, and they're asking for $6,000. Maybe we just meet them halfway somewhere. And 9 out of 10, they'll be like, yeah, let's do it. Julian, go ahead.
My question was regarding that section 2. The last part of it, it says, oh shit, you just moved it. I was about to read it.
Sorry. You were talking paragraph 14.
I was talking about, it says that the buyer is not entitled to cancel except for other things in this agreement. Let me see what it says exactly. Buyers not contractually entitled to have the repairs or other requests made and may only cancel based on contingencies in this agreement. Isn't this one of those contingencies?
What the condition of the property typically, right? One of the contingencies would be over here. It could be where to go. It's going to be review of seller documents, right? And typically investigation of property, you're not going to have that contingency removed because the buyer's agent is going to send you a repair request. So typically they're going to ask you for a repair request. You say no, and then they can cancel based on that repair request or what we call investigation of property. Let me give you an example.
So it is referring to itself then, right?
Correct. So let me give you an example. Or actually, we'll use Marcella as example, right? I'm a buyer's agent or the buyer, either one, and we did the inspections and we find out that there's $30,000 to repair this roof. We send a repair request based on paragraph 14B2, and the seller tells me, go kick rocks. Now, Marcella was able to negotiate and pay for half of the roof, right? But then if the seller says go kick rocks, then the buyer is not contractually entitled to have those repairs, right? And may only cancel based on the contingencies of this agreement. Typically, I'm not going to remove contingencies on inspections because that's part of the investigations. That's part of the repairs that I want you to do. That's part of I want you to fix this, right? Even though it's as is.